Hello everybody, and welcome to the LJL Officially Unofficial Cast, episode 20, gentlemen. We've actually hit double digits. We're no longer a teenager, and we're fully an adult now. Well done, lads. Well done. I think
we can almost drink in the US.
Almost. But
No. I need to step in here because you misunderstand, Alex. Why 20 is more important in Japan? Because that is the drinking age for Japan. Therefore, you need to crack out the beers, lads.
All right.
Because we are drinking age over in Japan, and this is the LJL podcast.
I got wine. I got something.
Hang on, I think I have actually got some beer around here.
Wait.
Another time.
Oh, he's actually going. Anyway, I will continue my introduction. Welcome to LJL Officially Unofficial Cast. I am
Japanese
your host.
whiskey.
Ooh. All right, boy.
All right. I am your host, Alex, otherwise known as Lexi, go by MaskedSwan on the internet. I am joined by the astute Alex, otherwise known as Nymaera.
Not the drunkard.
No, not quite yet. And the dazzling Sam, otherwise known as Initia1ise Hapgood. That is right. I always have the Hapgood brother duo, as they are my co-hosts, my co-casters, and friends as well. And I am that fortunate gentleman of a man. And as I say always, gentlemen, introduce yourselves again.
Oh, you're too kind. You're too kind. Yeah, we're back. We're 20 this week. And it's been a long time coming. It has felt like we're starting to really get through a number of these now.
Yeah, we definitely have. It's been such good fun. And of course, I'm Sam Initia1ise. I play, and I get excited about LJL and the fact we're into week 2 and things look spicy in the summer, don't they, lads?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. They're looking extremely spicy. But for our first-time listeners to this episode, Initialize, sir.
Yes.
What is this podcast, though?
Well, you see, there's been a problem.
Right, what is that?
In the LJL world, because all the content's been in Japanese, and there's been half a world that just doesn't speak that language, and we thought that can't continue to happen. So we decided to make the content, all of the content, for English LJL stuff, not all your content.
But what is the LJL? You haven't.
It is. Oh. I'm so sorry because the LJL is the Japanese professional League of Legends scene.
Oh, now I understand.
We cover it. I'm so sorry. I skipped ahead.
You were too. You were too enthralled in what truly we're excited to talk about and how spicy week 2 was. That means Nymaera. If we're covering the LJL and we're doing the exclusive currently English coverage, I mean that must mean we have something to do with Riot and their partners.
And many an important decision has been made over a glass of fine whiskey and other drinks of similar strength, and one could assume maybe that perhaps we did have one such drink with a Riot representative, and but no, we don't drink with any other people than ourselves. We share those moments for our brethren, and no one affiliated with Riot. We do this all off our own backs. We're independent, we're bootleg, and we're rocking it.
We are rocking it indeed. These opinions are, of course, though, as they are not part of Riot, like Nymaera said, they're all of our own opinions, and this does also not represent the LJL Officially Unofficial Cast. This is purely us spitballing, saying what's on our mind, and kind of maybe getting a bit more personal with our own point of views. You can always find all of our own personal views if you look below us. If you're watching the video, you'll be able to find our Twitter handles, as well as the LJL Unofficial's Twitter and Instagram and Twitch page. Those handles are LJL Unofficial for Twitter and LJL_officially_unofficial for our Twitch and Instagram, or a quick search on your dedicated search engine of LJL Unofficial and you'll find all of that, as well as we have a dedicated Discord channel which you'll be able to find in the show notes, as well as a quick Google search as well as you can also find this podcast, as well as all of our backlog of podcasts, as audio versions as well. If you're more of a walk and talk kind of person, you can find that on all major streaming platforms. Gentlemen, as we've all hinted towards earlier, week 2 was definitely an exciting one. We've already covered everything. If you're interested, you can find that on our YouTube channel, as well as our Twitch page for all the VODs as well. We're going to be doing a weekly roundup, but instead of this time going by team, we're going to spice it up and throw it up to a previous way we've tried doing it in the past, but a bit more structured this time between all 3 of us. And we're going to cover each team's journey this week so far for all of it. And, I mean, starting from the bottom. Hopefully at the end they will be there at playoffs. We'll have to find out. In 7th place with the shortest game time as well is Rascal Jester. And gentlemen, it's not looking great for the Jesters, is it?
No, it's not. And part of this is because, again, guys, it is visa issues that's holding this team down in a lot of ways. Vivid and Ninja are still caught in Korea. Japanese visa restrictions are extremely tough.
With COVID,
live and work in Japan, it's very, very difficult to begin with. Visas are very specific, and with the COVID stuff as well, it's just hard work. So I believe it's visa restrictions that are currently holding the team back.
Yep.
And that means that 2 of their key stalwart veteran players in Ninja and Vivid aren't on the squad. It means that substitutes Pink and Nagi are stepping in, and they're big shoes to fill, and I just don't think they're stage ready yet.
No. That being said, Pink, one of the rookies to go in the mid lane, pulled out a Katarina game for, I believe, the first Katarina competitive game in a long time, actually. I haven't seen it around for ages.
I tried to look for that, and I couldn't find anyone playing that champion in competitive play.
Because it was reworked in, what, 2017, 18?
Something like that, yeah.
And then for the spring of that split, really overpowered for a lot. We saw like Faker play like 5-6 games of it. That was really cool. And basically no one else played it. So Pink pulled it out versus Detonation Focus Me. They lost, but they made it hard. So even though it's 0-2, they're sat at 0-4. Not the worst week. Still not looking good though.
Apparently, with a very quick Google search, that is the first Katarina in season 10 in competitive play.
That doesn't surprise me. I'm just wondering if it wasn't played last season either. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
Give me a split second. 0 picks, 0 bans.
There you go.
Yep.
And that's all regions.
Anyway, so, however, as a Katarina one trick, Pink made it work. Got a double kill onto Seros and everything. But, yeah. So, the Rascal Jesters, they sat at the bottom of the table, but at least they gave us something to laugh about. Something to be excited about. It was fun.
Yeah, they had 2 pretty disappointing games. They did go against, obviously, as we've said, DFM, and their second game was against Burning Core. Their Burning Core game gave us a bit more hope for Burning Core more than anything else. It didn't go well, and yeah, as you guys have said, Pink tried something, but without Ninja and Vivid, you can tell the whole team just isn't gelling, really.
There's a lot of stuff to be said about fundamentals from the team as a whole. They don't look like they're on the same page. In week 1, at least their compositions were kind of smoothing over a couple of those cracks. You know, they had stuff like a Hecarim, who's just very dedicated, engaged. They tried something similar with a Malzahar this time in the mid lane from Pink. Again, not a pick that we see very often. But Pink just didn't have the fundamentals to stay safe in lane. Got ganked a lot, burned a lot of flashes. There were a lot of defensive ultimates and summoners used, and Burning Core just kind of ran them over.
So, I mean, probably 2 things. If I could just in terms of thing for the Jesters is, I think there's probably a couple issues for me that I think are alarming in that Hatchemetro is someone we've generally rated in the jungle. I think it's fair to say. I think Trundle, his Graves mechanically look okay, don't get me wrong, but the problem is Cog's not normally a pressure lane, and Pink definitely isn't right now. That means at the very least he's lost half a jungle probably because he can't play around it. Second of all, their normal point of strength, Art, is playing with a support who's just not really there yet, and when you don't have the synergy and your support's not up to par, that's not a strength either. So that's potentially 3 losing lanes in a meta where your jungler is super important and your star ADC can no longer play the way he wants to. That is an awful place to be at for the Jesters.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems for them, and it's the only thing we can say is hopefully moving forward, maybe they'll be able to get the players back. They need them back, or potentially playoffs might be a flash in the pan and a dream that would not be able to happen. So we hope for Zero and Vivid to be able to get there. Oh, Ninja and Vivid, rather. Sorry. I don't know who Zero is. What the fuck? To make their return back to the LJL safely as well.
Big time.
Let's move over to our darling team, who are sadly having a repeat of spring, but we know things can get better for them, but they're not quite in the same place, and that is Axis, who are also 0-4, and not looking so good, but not for the exact same reason as the Rascal Jesters, gentlemen, right?
They've had a tougher schedule, don't get me wrong. They had to play against CJ and V3 in week 1. But, I mean, this week they played against Burning Core. Then they did play against DFM as well. So they've played 3 hard teams, much like in Spring Split, actually. But the really alarming thing for me, much like with Rascal Jester and Hachimecha not really having the impact he did in spring, Hoglet's having similar issues for Axes. He's had 3 games of Graves, I think. Strongest jungler on the patch. Strongest jungler we've had for quite a while, in fact. And he is not impacting the map at all. He is becoming a non-factor, and after Graves falls behind, well, that champion doesn't really do much. You don't have even a Lee Sin kick to do something. They've had to play substitutes. Hyde's had to step out because of, again, travel restrictions, and one of the coaches, Coach Yang. So that means that Eunyan, traditional top lane, gone down to ADC, replaced with Natsume in the top lane, who's looked okay. But for me, there's some of the stalwarts, again, of Axis, similar to Rascal Jester, but in a different way, still not firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, no, he's not. He's had 2 games on Graves, 1 game on Silas, and 1 game on Kindred.
The Silas. Oh, that was.
I forgot the Silas game as well.
Horizon.
Yeah, that
for good reason.
For good reason. By once who got. It was. Part of it was smart play by Burning Core. Don't get me wrong, but once Hogger got behind, he kind of catastrophically fell behind. It wasn't like he lost. He got killed and lost a quadrant of his jungle, which is a really bad thing. With the point, it cost them top tower, and that's a really bad place to be. But there's having a bad game and falling off a cliff, and that was. There was a little bit of getting Sparta kicked off there. Wasn't looking pretty.
Yeah, it wasn't looking pretty at all. I actually got that initial stat wrong. Technically, Axis are in stone last, and as their average game duration is 30 minutes, and Rascal Jester is 32 minutes. So,
wow!
Must
so just in the tiebreaker.
Myself. Yeah, so that is where the marginal tiebreaker comes in.
Yeah, of course. Until the end of the split, we won't have a head-to-head. Of course, there is no official first indicator for tiebreaker there.
Exactly. So until the end, we won't truly know, but we can also use the GDM as well, and they are also not doing so hot, so not so good. The Hawks, the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, had a pretty disappointing week for them, also going 0-2, dropping 2 games this week. One was to Crest Gaming Act, and another was to Sengoku, so they fought 2 pretty hard teams. High hopes were for the Hawks to, especially from their first week performance, that maybe they've maybe cracked the code, maybe figured something out, maybe this change is working, and well, I think this was a good benchmark for both of for the whole team in general.
Yeah.
Because for week 1 was not a good benchmark for them. They played against the Rascal Jesters with a double substitute, and Rascal Jesters looked really out of sorts. And then they played against DFM. So they played against one very weak string team, one very strong team, and they were somewhere in between that. We figured they wouldn't be too strong. After this week, I would stand by that. They're at 1-3, and I guess being around the 6th place mark probably sells them. I'd probably say that's where they should be right now. Big problem for me is Adamic coming into that top lane just doesn't know how to play weak side. He's been very disrespectful on some picks, and against Sengoku, he was absolutely put under the bus. Absolutely.
Apamem was so happy.
Oh, for sure.
Like, it is something like I think there's something for the Hawks to play around in the mid 2v2. Tussle and Dasher look pretty good.
Yeah.
But their top side cannot play weak side, and it means that Tussle is consistently losing a whole quadrant of his jungle. Consistently. And Honey and Pooh are new, and they're paying okay for a rookie year, but when you've got okay in a bot lane, a collapsing top lane, and like a mid 2v2 that desperately needs to carry, that's hard work. And then versus, it would have been CGA that they lost to. Like, we saw like attempts at the 2v2 just getting inched out by Arya and Unica. Arya finding some really clever plays on LeBlanc. And that meant that even that lane where it was inches going the wrong way, and then the rest of the lane's kind of falling apart. That's a rough place to be.
But the thing is, go.
An important week for me, and honestly, more than anything, is we're going to find out whether they are a 6th place team or a 7th place team in week 4. And that's because they're going to finally place against Axis and Rascal Jester. That's going to be, quote, their easiest week. If Axis have maybe able to figure out some of this, well, the synergy that 4 of these members had in Spring Split, if they can figure out a way of doing it, Axis can still definitely make playoffs, or at least force a tiebreaker versus the Hawks, if the Hawks, in my eyes, keep playing to this level. Because there is that hope that Axis have shown, okay, we can things can start bad, but we can rally behind each other and figure it out. We all saw how much making playoffs meant to them at the end. So I wouldn't be...
And Corporal and Gauriadu have been playing fine, right? And actually, even Urnyan's been fine in the bot lane. I mean, well, his misfortune was fine. His Ezreal was lackluster. Very lackluster.
But in my eyes, I think Corporal is assisting with some of the shortcomings. And it's really good to have someone who's just solid in their role, like solid in the top lane, relatively speaking, and then having to flex down, at least he's already got synergy with the team. It's not a complete substitute coming in.
You're not slotting in a new player. Yes.
Exactly. You're not getting almost like the, oh God, I watched the video this morning, but you're not getting the Delta Fox, the old challenger LCS old pro team.
Echo Fox.
Yeah. No, not Echo Fox. You're getting Shifter and like
the meme dream team.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that in the weirdest way. You're getting instead of being support, it's AD carry. I'm a cutie pie and Shifter in that bot lane. Weird thought process.
What a world. But like, going back to the Hawks briefly. Honestly, I don't think they played that badly versus Sengoku. They were just up against a very coordinated, strong team. So again, that's not necessarily the best benchmark. Them losing against CJ in the way they did, though, it shows me if Hawks want to be an outplay team, which I would say CGA are, they're kind of our outplay team. They are not as good as CGA. No. And what that means is that you're probably not going to win in situations where CGA would. That's the logical follow-on step there. And that kind of consigns you to the bottom half of the table. Because you're probably going to have a 0-2 head-to-head versus CGA, and then a lot of other teams are not going to be so.
In all fairness, they have the lowest game duration across the whole thing because they lose so quickly. Even both Axis and the Jesters have at least 3 minutes on the Hawks, which is...
Oh, but things like the tiebreaker is average win time, so the losses don't get cut into that because it means that we could have really low game time because we get smashed.
This is their average game duration is 27 minutes, whereas Axis and Rascal Jester are both 30 and 32 respectively.
Yeah, and there is something to be said about and things like Axis and Rascal Jester. It means that at least they're kind of dragging out their losses a bit. And also, the good thing for the Hawks though is that their one win, it was versus the Jesters, was so dominant. It was the fastest game. It's 21-20.
Yeah, 21 something.
Really fast game. But yeah, no, the Hawks, if they consign themselves to being an outplay team, rather than, ironically, in the Jesters game where they were quite patient and more coordinated, I don't think they're going to go far.
I think that echoes me. Sam, any other closing thoughts for the Hawks? So
I think Al's covered most of it there. Yeah, I mean, there's an issue in the... I think the problem is that their their 2-star players are Tussle and... Dasher, but most of the mid 2v2s are as good or better or just more coordinated with their team.
Yeah, and I mean, this is due to the fact of obviously putting Dasher now from that top lane down into the mid lane, and that is definitely going to be a teething process, especially now playing in the league. Let us move on to our 5th place team, who actually had a pretty good week for themselves. However, this was maybe slightly beneficial because they were playing against 2 teams which had awkward substitutes and problems. We've already covered those teams, and that is Burning Core. And Burning Core went 2-0 this week. They are now sitting at 2-2. So, gentlemen, what is your current thoughts on Burning Core?
Didn't expect that.
Yeah,
that's about it. Yeah, go.
So, I mean, part of it as well, I kind of did in some ways, to be honest, if just because I think Once is really, really good, and this is a fantastic meta for him. This is a meta where carry junglers can really work. Once, even versus CGA, had a great early game versus Unica, and we've already said, who are they playing? It's Axis and Jesters. Hatchimetra and Hoglet have had rough starts to the split. There's some issues with laners not helping out junglers and the rest of it that's playing into that, but this was 2 games where Once got a Kindred did 9,000 damage in one team fight, obliterate in a 1v3. It was a game where he got Echo, went 8-0 and 4, paired up with Ray Farkey's Jason, obliterated the top side of the map. This was the 1v9 mentality I'd called out at this jungler where he will win you a game or int trying, and this was the game side of it. And I think it probably highlights where Burning Core, I think, may end up in the table if the meta kind of stays where it's at and teams don't shift around, which is, definitely a possibility. Where I think they're going to be a bit of a gatekeeper squad where teams who are better than them, they're not going to take games off because they need Once to carry too hard with Rayfaki. And teams who are worse than them, they will crush because Once and Rayfaki obliterate the jungle and they just have no legs to stand on.
You know what this kind of reminds me of? Like 2017 Misfits at Worlds. It's going to be a bit of a roundabout analogy, but that was a meta where Ardent Sensor was just king. You had to have Ardent Sensor, had to carry your AD carries with that. But their support, Ignore at the time, didn't really play Ardent Sensor support. So what they did, they just changed the roles within the team. They always played Ivan. He'd build an Ardent Sensor instead. They'd play Ardent Sensor mids as well, stuff like Karma, and they just kind of shift around the responsibilities there. Yuhi is not really a great AD carry. He facilitates in some ways, but his only really good carry champion has been Aphelios. Besides that, he's kind of struggled. Seeing Once pick up Kindred and Echo, he becomes the carry. He has that late game pressure, the team just plays around him. What's really interesting to me as well, Rayfaki hasn't necessarily been indexing towards all the split pushes, all the gangplanks, the Vladimir, stuff like that. He went toward Maokai twice already. He's played some Wukong, that's a different thing too. But, you know, to see Rayfaki take up the facilitating role and say, look, okay, Once you're going to take up the carry role, and for it to work for Burning Core, it shows that at least they have some formula to work with. So I'm pretty happy with this week for them.
Yeah, and something I kept harping on about a little bit is how impressed I was with Proud, and I think that really goes into the analogy that you brought up, Nymaera, with saying that wasn't quite sure how you were going about that analogy for God, what was the team name again? Misfits, sorry, thank you. Misfits in 2017 at Worlds. I think that's a really good point. Proud is playing a slightly different role in the team, and it's definitely working. He's almost Once's support. He's not Yuhi's support, which is definitely weird. And
Yu-Gi-Oh, remember, playing the double Lulu.
Oh, yes. And it
That's
definitely,
a big thing.
It paid off huge in so much. Yeah, Proud basically playing Set and Nautilus this week, and Yu-Gi-Oh playing double Lulu, and they hard carried. And it was really good to see Burning Core in a good place, and not all of the pressure being put on Rayfaki, which we saw a lot in spring. If
meta changes away from carry junglers, though, they are completely scuppered. They're completely scuppered.
It all goes back onto Rayfaki and that poor man.
His back is broken from spring.
I will also say that we saw Yuhi pick up the Kalista and do pretty well in lane actually on it as well. I mean, it was Kalista Nautilus. That's a pretty aggressive lane, don't get me wrong. So there's a base level of success you kind of expect there. And it was against Uinian, who is not exactly a high tier AD carry within the league. But the fact that it was not Aphelios where Yuhi looked, decent, that's good news for Burning Core too, in that actually maybe it's not as dire a need as you must first pick Aphelios or he's useless. And that's a very low bar to set, but that's something.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place. So, for Burning Core, seem to be the gatekeepers. I really like where you put that, Initialize.
I agree.
The kind of lower end gatekeepers, keeping the teams that are slightly lower or having problems, they will keep them down as they just have that coherency that they have built together. Now, this is where it gets interesting. I'm going to go by the average game duration from lowest all the way up for the next 3 teams. So the fastest team will be the last team we cover. So the first team we're going to be bringing on is Detonation Focus Me. Gentlemen, DFM had a slight return to form this week, more expected, but we have to put a huge caveat on it, for the same caveat that we gave Burning Core. The difference is for Burning Core, this is a good sight to see. For DFM, it's kind of business as usual, right?
Sort of.
Sort of. That's the way to put it.
So there has been a little bit of the G2 syndrome, the coin flip syndrome, where one game they are obliterating opponents, and the other game we have got question marks everywhere.
Expand, please.
And so probably a great example is that this week again we saw they had a very clean game versus half a second. Let me find what it was. Axis, yeah, where it was Ebby and Steel in the top lane. Well, basically the whole game, where it was the set for Ebby doing what Ebby does at level 1 through 3 on set, keeping Natsume completely away from the wave, going massive amount of CS and levels. Steel turns up in Italy. They outplay the 2v2 dive under, get 2 kills, and steamroll the game.
Okay, and then I want to pass out of time Nymaera, as you already brought up this Katarina. Can you expand for me the other one, where it wasn't so good?
basically, DFM, it looks like they've put themselves into a position where they want to outplay to win. Or rather, that's how they're winning. They're outplaying to win, and if you're playing versus the Katarina main and you throw down the gauntlet, sometimes you get, like, double killed. And in a 1v2, Pink double kills the mid-jungle solo of DFM. And just, like, takes down the Ziggs, takes down the Nidalee. And Seros had a shocking game. It was pretty bad, actually. This Ziggs was getting picked off left, right, and center. There was a point where, like, he satcheled into the Herald.
Oh, that was just awful.
I died.
I thought he'd been hooked, so I thought there's no
like,
way.
Oh, wow. It's just like, oh, he must have been hooked by the Blitzcrank. No, he did that to himself. He just, like, satchels over, like, the back of the Herald to, like, get a bomb off or something. And, like, basically they ended up eventually getting, like, a Dragon Soul. I think it was an Ocean Soul, actually. I think that was the big thing. I'm trying to remember exactly which one it was.
It was Ocean Soul, yeah.
Yeah. And they had an Ezreal as well, and eventually Utapon became, like, just Ezreal that we know him to be. And DFM just did not look clean. They did problem solve their way out of the situation. And also, Ebby on Renekton just was monstrous in team fights. This guy once again proves that he had a really bad laning phase.
Yes, was going to
came
interject
that. He got solo flash burned by Cog on Ornn, and then he died later on. He was like 0-3 or something. It was really looking bad. But his team fights were immaculate.
Seen before. I feel like that's something I've heard before. Ebby getting solo killed by an Ornn.
Yeah. So like.
Wait a second.
I kind of do want to step in on this because Ebby and Steel synergy is normally impeccable.
Yes.
They know how to play around dive super, super well, and Ebby's Renekton is pretty renowned. And in fact, it was kind of the set Nidalee combo the second time around versus Natsume and Hoglet and the Axis.
I'm gonna have to talk
really
about
clean.
that quickly, by the way.
Was really clean.
So you keep saying it's really clean.
Wait.
So,
can we just have Sam finish his point first before you do that? Hold on to it though. Go on, Sam, please.
Just in that, so we kind of expect that the top 2v2 synergy for Ebby and Steel is normally really good. They had a Renekton and a Nidalee. Renekton stuns, Nidalee throws a spear, you dive in, easy as you like.
Yep.
There were multiple times early on in this game versus Rascal Jester where DFM felt desynced. The stun was late from Ebby or Steel wasn't quite there in time. And it meant that it looked really ugly. They failed the dive. Eventually, it got to a point where Ebby ended up at 10 minutes with a CS lead and tower pressure. But the early lane, having blown Cog's flash in the jungle, but Ebby still lost his own flash, had to blow his own flash, was down CS. They got counter ganked. Steel survived on a centimeter of HP. And it just felt oddly clunky from what we expect to be very synchronized.
I think that synergy is a really, really good way of contextualizing that synergy felt off. Nymaera, what was the point you wanted to bring up while we were partway through the really expanding that point? So, thank you, Sam, by the way.
So, obviously, Sam was using the G2 analogy of, like, the coin flip kind of thing, and, like, just one team demolishing, and then kind of in other games, not so much.
Okay, at the beginning, sure, yeah.
Go back and watch that 2v2 in the top lane between Ebby and Steel versus Hoglet and Natsume. So last spring, the top lane was an absolute point of weakness for Axis. They were hammered through that, and this ended up being the same thing this game. The 2 kills from the set happened because a flash Q was missed from the Aatrox. Sam and I were having one of our brotherly squabble argument discussion things, and he was like, I swear they played that super well. I'm like, I distinctly remember something being missed. And we went back and watched it, and, like, Natsume ends up, like, missing the sweet spot on the Q by, like, units, but he misses it. The HP comes back for Ebby because he's obviously on the set. He regens very quickly, gets to a haymaker and gets the double kill. Literally, it's like half an inch, and suddenly that 2v2 goes over to the way of Axes. And this is not what I want to see from DFM. We've talked about them wanting to prove to us this split that they were, like, always certain they were going to win, and it's just steamrolling the way over the finish lines. This is far too close for the likes of DFM.
And I think that's really where it is. DFM, while they did win their games and even won their game against Axis in relatively dominant performance, there are certain cracks showing. Seros going 3, 6, and 13, losing in a 1v1 versus a rookie in their third game ever on the stage. Well, not on the physical stage, but the metaphorical stage at the moment. Sorry, we can't quite have the actual stage yet. Damn it. But that's crazy. Losing the 1v1 versus a rookie in his third game ever. And the synergy between Ebby and Steel was just off. And there are certain problems. And 100%, Sam. 100%. And come again when they start playing against CGA, Sengoku V3, and all these teams again on the second round robin and everywhere else. they're not going to get this free pass. They already didn't get it last week, so why are they already doing this, right?
Oh, it's like Ziggs walking close to the line. He's up 30 CS, looking for that satchel on the turret. Like, the 1v1 is going super well, and then he oversteps and Katarina gets a double kill. Like, there is just that element of, like, playing so close to the line, you overstep, and we've kind of generally praised DFM for being very aware of their lines and damage numbers, and it's kind of been like them overstepping that line a few times, and you know, and that's sometimes the way of these champions.
And sometimes they've let the opponent outplay themselves, and that's how they've won. And you know, that's a viable way. Sometimes you just you let the enemy play into your hands, but like this is really cutting it close.
Really is, and it's not looking great moving forward. Where do we think this is where they might be sitting at the table? Mid to high of the table if they keep playing with this arrogance, maybe? You hope they fix it, right? You hope they fix this kind of problem, because this is...
For the sake of the league.
Yeah.
You hope so.
I imagine they do. I also think to an extent they're kind of trying to experiment and grow a little bit, and I think that's kind of fine. Like, pick up the Nidalee, looking to do a little bit different player, and that's good stuff early on in the split, and I'm all right with that. If it becomes a consistent trend, I get more worried. But
something to put a pin in.
Yeah, it's something to keep an eye on, and like, and I don't mind them looking to try and go for the outplays and stuff like that. That's not a problem in and of itself. It's just when that's like the only way you can win.
But the thing about DFM is that next week they're going against the 2-2-0 teams from this week. So we've got like a whole convergence of like all of the teams that are currently on a streak going to fight off against each other. 1 week is not really enough for me to form any decent conclusions because we've seen how transient some of these runs of form can be. I mean, we saw Burning Core, for instance, in spring have some like really large streaks, and we had a podcast episode about some of the streaks and the turning points within that spring split. We could be starting to see some of these form here, but DFM, regardless of what happens in those results, they need to clean up what they're doing.
Yes, they went 2-0, but we're not particularly convinced by that. Reminds me of Sengoku. Yeah, I immediately thought
Sengoku week 4.
Yeah, where I completely forgot they even went 2-0, and I was like, oh yeah, they went 2-0. Anyway, let's move on to our next team. That isn't Sengoku. They will be the last one. This is Crest Gaming Act. And I think this is... Well, this is actually what I predicted to happen. So my predictions were made perfect here, and if you're interested in getting involved in predictions, you can join our Discord. We have a little prediction section going, and that will also be in the show notes, so check us out there if you're interested in getting involved. But Crest Gaming Act went 1-1, lost one game, won one game. They lost that to V3, but they beat the Hawks. And gentlemen, where do we think CGA is sitting at the moment? How do we think they're playing at the moment and moving forward?
I think Aria's playing great.
Okay.
Everyone else is a little bit all over the shop.
Well, I would put a caveat in that on what you just said. Nap's playing totally fine.
No.
That's the only person I'm going to defend that.
I said that more for the soundbite, really. No, I think Aria's the solo lanes of CGA have been impressive. I think my main problem with CGA is how their game plans are really not fit for course sometimes. They are, again, kind of like DFM, trying to just outplay their way to a win. And of course, I said that about the Hawks as well. They have the individual talent to make it work, and their individual talent are playing the power picks. And of course, Gango has some interesting ADCs to pull out the pocket as well. But they are a team which I think we can see the ceiling of them if they keep playing with these kind of strategies in mind. I'm just wondering which teams are going to exploit that.
Yeah, I think there are some bright spots. Nap is probably up there as the best weak side top laner in the league. He's very consistent, and like I wouldn't put him up as like he's not going to be a primary carry. He's unlikely to be your secondary character, but he can come in as that tertiary option and kind of be extremely stable in like his Renekton 1v3 outplay against a poorly played dive. Don't get me wrong, but he played it really well. It was great to see versus the Hawks. Aria's still a monster. Eunuch is teaming up pretty well with the guy, even if it is at the expense of his pathing, and that's a bit of a concern. And that's good news. What is worrying is I think V3 really exposed where CGA's flaws are, and it kind of comes down to the fact that if they cannot skirmish and win, or if they cannot team fight and win, they don't have as an option B. And if their early lanes kind of fall apart because someone's got a good plan, that V3 level 1 that kind of destroyed the game plan of let's all play around bot lane, fell apart from the level 1 invade. What do they do from that? They didn't really have an answer. They just sort of sat around and lost. And that worries me a little bit more for CGA.
Yeah, and I'm really worried that Unica could be having extra effects on the team, especially against someone like V3, someone like against Blank, also against, remember, Steel as well. They will be able to exploit him, and he consistently is a level or like at least 10 to 15 CS behind at about the same amount of time frame, and he's normally playing junglers which are reasonably decent at doing that farming clear, and he just seems to be falling passively behind. And I would need to definitely, well, ideally you'd love to have pro view so you could just watch and really analyze. Yeah, and maybe it's something that maybe we should do on the side and maybe break down a game and kind of understand.
Yeah, do some overview. Yeah.
But it's something I've noticed, and it's not something that any other jungler is really having a problem with. Even Hoglet rarely falls this far behind. And
it was the silent game, and that was the big
once is making things look pretty nasty. In fairness, he's been exploiting other junglers. But I agree.
Hachimecha never falls behind in CS or in farming and levels. Even when he falls behind and gets counter jungled and everything, he still finds a way to stay there. And I don't know how he's doing it. In all fairness, I don't have those answers. It's just an observation I'm having, and I'm wondering if maybe that was a problem, especially when you're playing against a jungler like Boogie, who will exploit the fuck out of your jungle.
Well, to want to wade in on this a little, CGA, I think this is probably part of the problem I have with CGA in general, is their only option if they're in a bad position to try and fight their way out of it. And that's all well and good if you can win the fights, but if you can't or your squad's not there, I do think there's a bit of an issue where CGA don't have a macro option out of problems sometimes.
Ooh, okay.
That's pretty much what I said after that game of V3 because they played against this Karma mid just group as 5 comp with Archer just being unkillable and Aphelios and I think it was that was the game.
Yep.
And CJ didn't know how to split the map, and that really was an eye opener to me. It's what happens if they ever come up against a Death Pool comp again? What if they just don't have? What's happening there? Do you have any other options? You're not going to pick someone like a TF like Sengoku did. You're probably not. Well, I mean, I'm sure Aria can play anything, but. I'm worried about CJ when they have to not just outplay their way out of stuff, and this is why I'm talking about the game plan thing. I expanded into that a little bit in some of the post games. You're just waiting for Aria to pull off some magic, and when you're against some hyper defensive picks, just loads of disengage, it really sucks. And a lot of that does come from jungle difference, right? It just does, because I think Unica, while he's been that third summoner for Aria, just turning up in the mid lane, making 2v2s happen, even back in Spring Split, week 2 or something, when V3, or week 3, when they finally met up as V3 versus CJ, I was predicting a V3 win, because I'm like, look, I just don't trust CJ's jungle position. And even without Yoshi now, of course, they're doing that double jungle rotation, presumably, although Unica's played all the games so far. It's still a concerning role for CJ.
I mean, I think we need at least one more week with Unica to really do that. But when do we think maybe Yoshi was just a little bit more consistent and wasn't maybe I don't know, and I'm just asking the question. It's kind of a loaded question without an answer really to it, but when do we maybe bring back Yoshi? Because I don't recall him falling this far behind in levels, at least, and that might just be me misremembering, and that could totally be it, and that's why the podcast is where I can say these statements.
I mean, lad, they've got Sengoku Gaming next week. That's going to be Blank is a very smart jungler, and Sengoku Gaming are playing very cohesively around Blank at the minute, mostly speaking, and that could be a worry in that match.
And Aria 1v5 one of their games in spring against Sengoku, maybe.
They did, but they're also not going to have. I mean, Unica's going to also get tested against one of the weaker teams, but maybe one of the better junglers in the weaker teams, and that's going to be Hachimecha, who will not roll over and let him take it. Hachimecha is we always praise Hachimecha for content he puts out and because of the jungle clear times and everything else. And it gives us an insight into the Japanese way of thinking for the professional level. So it's useful to see that. So moving forward, some question marks for CGA, but I think they're safe for playoffs. I think that's a guarantee for them. How far they'd go, we will have to wait and see. Gentlemen, that brings us to our final second place team, and that is Sengoku Gaming, who had a pretty interesting week, I think is the easiest way for me to describe it. I think interesting is how I want to put it, and I want to pass it over to you two to kind of frame how we want to discuss these two games, as they beat the Hawks but lost to V3, and these were two very different games for the Sengoku.
And there were it was a really big night and day difference in certain things about these games. Two things. One was sticking to the game plan. Sengoku, we have praised them a lot about that in week one, and of course in this first game as well versus the Hawks. They picked the TF and they played to their gangplank, got the gangplank ahead, and then sent the enemy top lane to 0-6. That's really cool. Good job. You managed to set up a winning map state and you just rolled to a victory through that. Game two, they played against V3 and they were kind of forced into fights they didn't really want to take. They ended up having the jungle pool super pinched. They picked up a Kayn, really interesting, don't get me wrong. I love to see new picks coming out. But Kayn cannot fight early into the game, really. You can have some interesting jungle plays starting on Raptors, starting on Wolves and stuff, but until you get that transformation, you are behind enemy junglers, and they got a little bit dismantled. So for me, the game plan was one thing, and then, well, we'll get on to another thing first if you've got opinions on that. But
yeah, I think V3 this week really impressed me.
No, Sengoku. No, we're going to talk about V3 in a bit, so please, I really want to keep only Sengoku.
Specifically versus Sengoku, there's just a good game plan, and Sengoku Gaming, like, blank not being a point of pressure was a bit worrying, and Pyrion kind of got caught versus Ace, like, because blank couldn't be there for a 2v2, it was a 1v2, and Zoe ended up in a tricky spot. And while they did, I think V3 just played, Sengoku, while versus the Hawks, they played super well to their win condition. In this one, like as Al was saying, they were struggling to find a map state where they could. They did a good job of like getting gold and getting towers, and that kept them at least a little bit ahead in terms of just raw metrics. But where that gold was and where that relative power was, and relative power was a really big problem in this game, where Archer on the Ezreal with the Ignite was just bigger than Utori. The Kayn was not it was like struggling to make as much impact as Boogie was on the Trundle, and that put Sengoku Gaming in a difficult place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about the game plan, and then also execution, and how they kind of continued that throughout the two different games was night and day different. Obviously, certain key members, blank does seem to be a very important part for a lot of victories, and outplaying potential and just knowing where things happen. When he's on someone like that Kayn, it was huge spam question mark pings were coming out, and I mean, I remember watching that game and just kind of going, well, what are Sengoku doing? They're just getting brutalized everywhere, and it all kind of fell on Yutori Mawashi, but even then he got loads of farm, but then that's kind of it. He got these kills towards the end of the game, which he
nearly 200 years them, nearly.
Almost.
He had like a really good Infernum all that one time. The big thing for me though, which also kind of came along with this, and Sam talked about a little bit, was of how Pyrion played, particularly in this Zoe game. He was, for the first time so far, I mean, it's only been 4 games, he was punished really hard. He was against a Galio Zoe. That's a matchup you want to abuse. I'm wondering if you got lost in that mindset and said, got to get all my damage down. I've got to be a point of pressure. And then a Trundle Pillar comes in and he either burns Flash or he dies. And this is something he was doing the opposite on TF, right? In the first game, he was making himself really hard to take advantage of. Against DFM, we had a whole argument about it in the last episode and some things. But one of the key things is that Pyrion did make himself hard to abuse on the Zoe versus Zareth matchup. I'm wondering if this is a mindset thing of being in a matchup where he should be abusing that, and he's going, I've got to make the most of this. Whereas when he's in the defensive matchup, he's playing it really well. So I need to see Pyrion in an aggressive matchup again, playing it to the limit but not over it, before I'm kind of once again sold on Sengoku.
I think. Go for it.
Can I throw a last?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
Yutori and Enti have largely played non-interactive bot lanes. Blank, Pyrion, and Appermen have been hard forcing the top side. We saw it with the game where they dismantled the Hawks. It was Blank, Appermen, and Pyrion just turning up top and dismantling Aramik. We've seen them play around Pyrion in the mid lane, but it means that the bot lane has largely been left on an island. And I did wonder what would happen if someone forced on Sengoku's bot side and how they'd play around it. And
the finals,
it punished them this game. Yeah, in the finals as well. And That's kind of a little bit worrying in of itself. Of course, there are caveats. The Kane's not fantastic at fighting early. That's a big deal.
I'm playing from
but
behind.
Also, it was a thing where like, okay, in the 2v2, Utor and NT play weak side just fine. But when it's not the 2v2 and the other team is trying to make it not weak side, that's problematic. And we did see them get a little exposed there, even if it comes with the caveat of the jungler was in a weird place to fight.
I mean, you guys, everybody knows I love to talk about the draft picks and stuff. And I think part of the problem was that Blank, they didn't pick his jungler. They left him to the second round of pick and ban phase. His Kindred and Lee Sin was banned into Boogie's Trundle, which was known information. Known information! And then they lose. And then I'm like, part of me looks at it and goes, well, if you just get Blank on either his Lee Sin or Kindred, there's no necessarily saying that this game changes at all. But we know what Blank can do on these two champions. And, well, we know exactly what he can do on his Lee Sin, because his Lee Sin is as good as Boogie's, who I think it's about time we probably move over to Boogie and crew. My God, gentlemen, V3 Esports, first place in the table, took care of two teams, that being Sengoku Gaming and Crest Gaming Act, and their games looked rather well, if I have to say so myself. I was thoroughly impressed with the display of ability on show from this team.
They look really coherent. And it's not just coherent, it's coherent with the direction. It's the direction with star power behind it, and it's star power with multiple ways to play. This is the most confident I've felt about V3 in quite a long... Well, I mean, we only saw them like last summer with a very different lineup, and then in spring trying to kind of fit the pieces together. They're looking really scary.
Yeah, it's just smart as well, frankly. They are playing really smart from level 1. Like, they just know what they are going to do in game and are really decisive about it. I think. Versus CGA, the level 1 was so smart. They put it into vertical jungling, so Archer and Reiner can shove up on Aphelios Thresh. It's Boogie's Lee Sin. They dive bot lane. They get double kill down there onto Gango and Grendel. That bot lane is shut down. CGA's whole idea of like, well, we'll have Olaf and Zoe roam bot and play with the Ezreal Yuumi and try and win out there. Nah, not going to happen. And CGA don't have an answer. Versus Sengoku, again, it's just smart.
And I want to take a point from Nymaera, and I'm giving credit where credit is due. And this was something that Nymaera said. Ace has figured his role out in the team. And now that Ace has figured, or V3 has figured out Ace's role in the team, and now that that's been figured out, Boogie is able to play his full champion pool up to Trundle, who is not a carry jungler, all the way down to his Lee Sin, who is a hard carry early ganking jungler, and just play the whole range of it. Ace is playing things like Galio and Karma. If he pulls out a Lulu, I would not be surprised. He's doing
because
go on.
I feel like it's really, really ironic. The V3 have found the DFM solution to their mid laner. They just do what they do to Seros. They just make sure he's on something that he finds impactful.
Can I put an asterisk here?
Absolutely. Go for it.
His asterisk is he plays LeBlanc. And he plays a good LeBlanc, which means...
He does play Zoe too.
He does play Zoe. His Zoe's, as I believe we said on cast, his Zoe is, as is Jace. We know you love these picks, Ace, and we're not flaming you for that. But my God, is your LeBlanc the best out of those? But also, you're so good on Galio. You're so good on Rumble. You're so good on Karma. I imagine you'll probably play a great Lulu. And oh my God, you're basically... This was another thing I'm going to steal from Nymaera. Oh, I think it's Nymaera. He's like Doinby.
It's like Teachama Doinby.
Yeah, kind of,
Teachama. He's that kind of like so don't get me wrong, it's not none of these analogies are perfect. It's just it's an entertaining way to think about it. But again, like Doinby it was the post game of one of those games. It was of the CJ one, right? Where Audio was like, don't get me wrong, smashing lane and kind of like forcing summoners and stuff out of the Karma.
Out farming by miles.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Like he teleports bot lane and gets like a double kill and a dive bot. Well, he gets like 2 kills for his team in bot lane.
Archer got 2 kills and just won the lane partly through that with Boogie's assistance. They 4-man boss and basically won the bot lane in like minute 5, and it was and then Unico's just like, fire happened. What do I do?
And And the big thing for me about this is that there is this kind of like question mark still hanging over them from their semi-finals against DFM, where V3 played the Trundle Galio comp versus DFM. And I mean, I was quite vocal about this off air for us guys. I mean, I was using quite a lot of strong words for it. I was of the opinion that if that one invade onto Gromp where the Galio was used and then Steel gets out went well for V3, I think they actually win that game from a snowball. And for me, there's something about V3 having these win conditions available, and now they're very much on the same page about it as compared to the last playoffs. I need to see them in that pressure scenario versus very high-tier opposition again, don't get me wrong, but the pieces are there, and they're starting to stick together.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. I think for me as well, I think Ace, when he can facilitate a carry jungle meta for Boogie, wonderful. You set the mid 2v2, but rather than the jungler feeding kills the mid lane, you feed it to an Italy. Sounds good to me. Or you run things like the Karma and you have Archer, who is shoving up with an absolutely phenomenal support in Reiner at the mid. Like, the man did not miss any hooks for 5-6 minutes versus Gango and Grendel. Who was on bloody Ezreal, who'd started Arcane, who'd started Arcane Shift on Ezreal.
That's right.
Didn't miss him at all. It was absurd. Like that's really good signs. I will say that we have seen when Archer tries to carry a lot, and we have seen him where he goes 1-6, 1-7 on Aphelios or whatever against really good AD carries like Yuta and Mayashi in big games.
Mm-hmm.
That could still be a problem, and I need to see him show up against teams that play bot side weaker or will contest down there and make it a more even matchup.
And what is good to note is that for Paz, against both Apperman and Nap, he had pretty quiet laning phases, playing that Wukong and that Ornn. Basically had very quiet games, but guess what? Only in one of them was he really called upon, and he delivered exactly when he needed to. And then the other game, when he didn't need to be called upon, he just had a very, very strong game. Just had a very strong and solid game, and just was able to go 0-0-10 on Ornn. That's great. When you're an Ornn and you just go, I didn't die, I tanked most of the damage, and guess what? With a Karma mid, nobody dies. And only Reiner died in spots where the whole team got an ace, I think, is what happened most of the time. Which, Reiner, sorry. Fuck.
Well, no, we're learning. We are.
When Reiner would only die when like the team got a triple kill or quadra kill or an ace, basically, not literally a quadra kill. Except actually, we did see that from once, to give him credit. Yeah. Sadly, Ardi was taken away from the first.
He had that unofficial Penta, yeah.
So close.
I feel like that was a bit weird how he didn't quite get it, because it felt like it wasn't.
It timed, it times out pretty quick sometimes.
But that is that, and V3 leading the pack, gentlemen, right, and looking strong, giving the first 2 losses to 2 of the second place teams. So putting them in a good place right now, right?
It's huge. It's huge this week, yeah. And next week, of course, is going to be really big as well, facing us DFM. If they beat DFM, I'm willing to call them front runners.
Yeah. You have to by that point.
I mean, as much as because I try not to be results based oriented, because I could be sat here and like V3, therefore, no, they're undefeated. That is a good thing, and therefore they are the best. And DFM, they lost that one game and they look bad. No, we don't do that here. We try not to do that here. We try not to do that here. But no, I think the big thing for me is that V3 are starting to show not just success, but like confident success on strategies that weren't working in spring in quite a visible way, like having Boogie on stuff like the Trundle.
Yep.
He was all over the fucking shop. He was controlling Blank. He was ganking Pyrion, and people on his team were willing and ready to be carried and carry themselves with that pressure. That's a really big thing for me. They look on the same page. Maybe there'll come a point where some team just outplays them and rattles them or something. I need to see them again kind of have the plan start falling away from them. Maybe go up against a really strong level 1 team or something.
Yeah.
We said that about DFM in spring. I'm trying to add these caveats to each of the strong teams. Say, like, look, I need this kind of to secure myself in here because, you know, we expect good things coming into Worlds and whatever. V3, I want to see someone come in with a really good level 1 early game plan, rattle them and see if they can recover from that. If they do that, all's good.
Yeah, I think for me, it's good drafts, it's good plans, particularly early on, and it's varied styles of play. We've seen Boogie on 3 different ways of playing junglers. It's Lee Sin, it's Nidalee, it's Trundle, and they seem to be really decisive. I agree with Nymaera, though, that I do want to see them where the early plan doesn't come together. What happens? And we have seen it before for V3, particularly around the bot lane. snowball horribly against them. And I want to see what happens then. So DFM next week, Utapon and Gang are no slouches, and Steel's a pretty smart jungler. I think it'll be a good test for them. If they come out on top, they are my forerunners at the minute.
High expectations placed upon V3 and a lot of things. I'm excited to see them against DFM if my prediction for them becomes true of potentially V3 winning. Then it will be a very interesting place for the LJL moving forward. But you can have great beginnings, but slip up towards the end. We've seen it happen before in other regions. We haven't necessarily seen that happen in the LJL quite yet, but who knows? It's early time. It's too early to really make decisive decisions.
Yeah.
I got there eventually. My head was kind of like wanting to go one way with the analogy, and then
It wasn't decisive.
It was
You know,
not.
you just didn't make that decisive decision.
It was not. But you know who I have been decisive with? My players of the week, dear listener.
Oh, I haven't. Oof.
I think pretty decisive, I think.
So, gentlemen, and dear listener, we always rank our players of the week. We give our individual for laners of top jungle, mid, AD carry, or the bot lane, and the support role. And then we also give our overall player of the week. As we always do, I give my one, then we go for jungle for Initia1ise, and then we go for the mid lane for Nymaera, and then we rinse and repeat it round for the next 3 roles. Gentlemen, in the top lane, I have put Ebby.
Who do you want to go next?
Initia1ise, would you please go first?
All right. Second verse, same as the first, rather. I am also Ebby.
Hey!
Man was a monster.
And for you, Nymaera?
We are all in agreement. It's Ebby. He's back.
Yeah, Ebby's back, even when he plays weak side, even when the rest of the team looks a little bit shaky, he can just pull it back like nothing happened. And he's one of the few top laners in my eyes that can do that, I think.
To that degree.
Yes.
Yeah, the guy's a monster. Particularly that one set game he had showed us, again, why we think so highly of him. I mean, pretty much in my pre-split predictions, I'm just sat there after last split. I mean, we saw echoes of this again in this week even. I don't know if I can bet against DFM because Ebby's on their team. I just don't know. Ebby is that good.
It does make me wonder moving forward how good Ebby is and how much maybe he's hamstrung by the region. It genuinely does, because he's just so much better than basically everybody else, excluding maybe Rayfarki. And the only reason we have that caveat for Rayfarki, or at least I always harp back onto it, is because Rayfarki's just on a team that isn't quite there on every other level. So that's why when we see Rayfarki in the 1v1, it always seems very competitive, because when it is the true 1v1, which he never gets for long, because Steel goes, mate, why are you doing this on your own? I'm just going to make sure I'll get one Nidalee spear, which I won't land, because I'm a god at Nidalee, by the way. What? Steel's just so good.
Very good
Steel's so good. But bring it back to Ebby. Ebby just doesn't matter. He just beats everybody, abuses set level 1s when nobody else does, and I love the man, frankly.
I mean, even the Renekton game that we had the question marks early versus the Jess is like, the Steel and Ebby, a little bit off the same page, recovered, got the CS lead, got the turret plates, even if the early phase was a bit weak. Ebby's recovery was very strong. His later fights were really strong, and the set game, as we said, was just excellent.
It really was. Initia1ise, sir, you are our jungle main, and you have the honors of going first and revealing who your jungler of the week was.
He 1v9'd twice in a row. It's once.
Nymaera, sir?
I controversially am not agreeing. I'm going for Boogie.
That's not a bad call.
It's not a bad call. I also went with once as well. So, as is tradition, minority goes first to defend their points, so all are on the same page. So, Nymaera, why is Boogie your player of the week? We
just talked about in our standings why V3 are coherent. They have win conditions. They're all on the same page. And I also talked about how Boogie just ran around Sengoku. And Sengoku were a team I was very impressed with coming into this week. Not just that, V3 took 2 wins over the two 2-0 teams, handed them losses, and they looked very happy about it. And a lot of that was off of Boogie's back. And Boogie, I didn't think he could control the map as hard as he did in those 2 games. Completely proved me wrong. It wasn't necessarily as explosive as once, and again, very important guy. And if you're talking about value to their team, I could definitely see why he wants to be above him in some ways. But for me, Boogie, I just love the way this guy paths. Love the way he can exploit some players when they think they're safe, and he's a fantastic jungler to watch.
Go for it, Nina.
Yeah.
Initialize. Go for it.
Like the thing is, I actually initially wrote down Boogie and changed my mind.
Me too. Me too.
Very similar thoughts to Nymaera, because actually he played so well on champion on the Trundle as well, which we'd said, oh no, I don't know whether VT3 can play around that super well. It's really great, but I think for me the reason I went for once in the end was kind of how necessary this man is at the minute to Burning Core succeeding, and the fact that Burning Core got a 2-0, I feel was really on the back of once carrying his heart out. His Kindred game where he put out 9k damage in one team fight was absurd. His Echo game was just brilliant. Teamed up with Ray Farkey super well. He also put Hoglet in the dirt, killed him in his jungle, took a whole half of his jungle, then got the first tower as well. Just really smart. And like Burning Core rely on this man so much. And just for pure value, this man was a monster this week.
I have to echo everything you said there. Once played...
Echo.
I have to like he played so good on just spots that he I think single-handedly the point where we said they will be the gatekeeper of the lower end of it, I think is partly just through once in my eyes, and that might be wrong. I might be totally incorrect with that. But that's kind of where I could see once being. He's going to be the jungler that can just control the rest of the game and kind of go, well, we don't have to worry too much because once we'll just be able to carry those games for us. But I totally agree with everything you said. And Boogie was so up there because he's such a necessary evil for the wins against CGA and Sengoku. There is nothing you can take away from that. And I totally agree. And it's why he was also one of our MVPs. Like, you can't say anything else about him. He's just so good.
Yeah.
So good indeed. That means, Nymaera, our resident mid laner. Sir, would you do me the honors of introducing your mid laner of the week?
I'm really becoming the LJL's LS. LS really loves Chovy, but honestly, I feel like Chovy's underrated. So there's this one guy who's just really good at everything he does. I feel like if he was in my life, I'd be just a perfection. I'd be perfected as a being. My mid laner of the week is Ardia.
What?
My mid laner of the week is Ardia.
Oh my god! All right. Wait. Before we go any further, I'll do my one. I picked Ace as my mid laner of the week. Initialize. Pick yours.
So did I.
Okay. Yeah.
Ace,
okay.
Yeah.
No. We'll be quiet. We have to be quiet. And Nymaera, as the minority, please defend your point so we're all on the same page before we say anything.
Much in the way that you guys voted for once in jungle role, Ardia is so integral to his team. And we've talked about sometimes they just wait to fight their way out of a spot. I'm actually not sure I completely agree with that statement. I think they wait for Ardia to fight his way out of their team's deficit. We saw. I mean, tell me I'm fucking wrong.
You're not.
You're not. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say you're wrong. You are.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, we saw CJ versus V3. Ardia was still putting so much pressure out in lane, and V3 as a team holistically overcame that, and they overcame the team of CGA. I don't think Ardia played badly that game, and for me, normally when like one player has like a meh game and a great game, I'm like, okay, I need to go find someone with 2 consistent games or 1 standout game and whatever. I think Ardia had 1 good game on this Zoe versus Ace.
Yep.
Then he played LeBlanc. And he played LeBlanc versus the Hawks and went 8-0-2, made some of the best mechanical plays we've seen out of a mid laner. With like a double dodge of ultimates on 1 distortion with a perfect... He dodged out of a cataclysm perfectly timing distort. It just blows my mind what this guy can do. And I know I'm a fanboy. I know I am in some ways. But I do think the value he brings to his team, and particularly this week, can't be understated for me. So he is my mid laner of the week.
I mean, this is the location where you can be a fanboy and you can give your personal opinions. And you can say whatever you like, even if your brother and co-host and friend disagree with you, for we think we might have to put you into LJL questioning later. The police might be knocking on the door due to the insanity of the fanboyness that is coming through.
What can you're gonna sit in this?
Oh god. May I take the lead on this one?
Initialize? I'm gonna sit and simmer here for a moment.
All right. So, Okay, so Arya didn't even beat Ace and was far more impactful in their own game in the 1v1 in my eyes when CGA faced off against V3. Ace roamed and was actually getting far more pressure around the map. He allowed that that double kill to happen in the bot lane with a 4-man dive. He played around the map more aggressively, and I was just... And the reason, more than anything, yes, he lost lane versus Arya. Fair enough. And Arya dominates almost everybody in the mid lane. I think only really Pyrion and Syros can give him at least some competitive...
Oh, Gadiato's pretty good too.
Gadiato's pretty good, but the problem with Gadiato is the rest of his team kind of can't back him up always, especially Hoglet, where we have some questions there. Jungle 2v2 for that one is always a very interesting discussion for us. But Ace... Now finding his role in the team, my God, genuinely popping off for me in so many spots. I am so impressed with him. I was singing his praises towards the end of Spring Split, and as I said at the end of the cast, what is happening is if Ace is already starting to get to where he was at the end of Spring, at the beginning of Summer, very good things could be happening for V3, especially when your jungler is Boogie, and you just had Boogie as your jungler. So I mean, I don't think I need to say more. I'm really impressed with Ace, and I think this was arguably his best week ever in the LJL so far for me, at least.
No, I agree.
But in 2020, I should put that.
Ace had a really good week. I'm not detracting from that.
No, and we know that you're a fanboy as well. So yeah. Any other points I might have missed, Initialize?
Yeah, I think I thought about Arya after the LeBlanc game, but I was actually not all that impressed with the Zoe game, because while he had great pressure in lane, he had 0, was not roaming out. Did not roam out of lane, like, at all. Ace was everywhere. That makes the difference for me, is actually, I think, Ace facilitated Boogie and Archer so damn well. As part of the reason why I didn't put Boogie as my jungler is actually, I thought... Once was kind of having to do a lot more on his own back, whereas I think Boogie had a fantastic team around him, and that's always the curse of good teams and good players on good teams. You sometimes wonder, like,
he was
how much
40
is this
CS up on an Olaf.
Yeah, right, exactly, and that's fantastic. It genuinely was. But I think part of it as well is that he had
as Lee Sin,
which was brilliant. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And part of it as well is I do think that Ace and Rhina really played well around Boogie, and I was very impressed with kind of Ace's understanding and roaming and ability to facilitate plays this week was really excellent. His Galio in particular very much impressed me against the Sengoku Gaming that were very dominant. He teamed up so damn well with Boogie to take out Pyrion in the mid lane. And the synergy with Boogie and the way he's roaming in lane and invalidating the other mid laner's strengths very much impressed me this week.
I just want to wonder something out loud now regarding Ace. Do we think this is why the beginning of Spring and Ace specifically looked kind of weak during Spring until the end, where he started playing these more utility champions? Maybe they had been trying
the role.
Yeah, and maybe it just took them all of Spring to really figure that out slowly.
Yeah.
And
it's like, yeah, I mean, the thing is though, like, he still has other directions he can go in, right? We've seen the Syndra, fantastic. I think his Syndra is still undefined KDA, undefeated.
I believe so, yeah.
I'm pretty sure he's got like a KDA of like about 60 something on that champion.
Wow.
I
mean,
and then his LeBlanc, of course, we've noted as well being pretty big, and that's why I'm like, hey, if we're gonna compare this guy to Seros, as you were rightfully saying, well, he does play LeBlanc and he does play the Syndra too. Although Seros plays that too. It's very, very scary if V3 had patched up their mid lane issues they had mid and into kind of like that playoffs bracket of, the last series against DFM from Ace. If they've managed to patch that up, find a role that still works for their team, if that can transcend the next couple of patches and make its way into playoffs, they're a genuine dark horse into frontrunner.
Yeah, I think that's a lovely place to end that. And again, I am totally fine with the fanboy pick. I love it a little bit. I do love it.
I disagree with the whole thing about him having 0 impacts on the whole like.
I didn't say that.
You realize he had 2 of his team's only 3 kills. And every opening
in the bot lane when it was falling apart, it's like, yeah, it got CS. It's like, no, but like, man, you poked out on a karma, it doesn't matter. You're not around for the fight.
How much of that is okay? How much is that the pick, and how much is that him actually perform? Because like, this is the whole thing I was talking about last week in terms of if someone is on a powerful pick, or put it this way, if you're expected to do something on a champion, right? So you're playing Aurelia in mid lane, you're kind of expected to get solo kills in a good matchup, kind of, right? Yeah, level 6 Aurelia. It used to be like the meme was like in the LEC broadcast queue. Oh, it's Aurelia solo kill time. Because at level 6, on average, Aurelia would have a solo kill at 6 pretty much every game.
Unless you're Dasher.
Same thing with Ezreal.
Unless you're Dasher.
Unless you're Dasher, unfortunately. I mean, even then, in his top lane versus Axes, he got 2 solo kills versus Union before he started getting shut down. In last split.
I mean,
last
I
split.
exaggerated a certain amount, but like the fact he was 0-0,
but the things are like
0-0, didn't end the battle at all, didn't help the bowling bot lane, was a problem.
I think that Arya was not the problem that game. I think it's a draft thing in some ways. But I mean, anyway, we'll move on eventually. I just want to say, like, Ace still, Arya still played well. On
and I don't have a problem. And this is where we can have these discussions and opinions come through. So, yes. Very happy with that. Gentlemen, it's time to reveal who our ADC is, and as it's my turn, I will go first. I have picked Archer as my AD carry, my bot laner. First off, Initia1ise, who's your bot laner of the week?
I too have gone for Archer, who I think was pretty phenomenal this week.
Okay, Nymaera?
It took us a while, but we're all in agreement again.
Hey!
Archer for me too.
I don't think this is a hard one. I don't think this is a hard one, really, to describe why. He had arguably one of the best weeks ever. Nymaera hinted towards it earlier, I believe, where he said he had a phenomenal game, was carrying on just the Aphelios and the Ezreal, right? And just played beautifully. Like, this was maybe his best week we've seen from Archer. V3 put complete trust, and part of this is due to the fact that Boogie, Paz, Ace, and Reyna were all really supporting him to be a carry. They realized when they can put him as a carry, they realized, well, okay, maybe Archer's not having a great one. They started delegating a lot of that more into Paz, and it worked perfectly. V3, and specifically Archer, are phenomenal right now, and he outplayed both Gango and Yutori, specifically Yutori, which I think is a really big deal for me.
Actually, the really big thing for me, he won both sides of the Ezreal Aphelios matchup. Part of that's his team setting him up for success. Oh, I missed that.
Oh god, yeah.
But he played Ezreal into Yutori and NC's Aphelios Thresh, and they traded 1-for-1, but Archer got the kill at level 1 and stuff like that. Like, he played that matchup really well. In the second game versus CJ, of course, they were set up for success with the vertical jungling and the dive onto bot lane and stuff, but like Archer was given he either made or was given the means to carry and then carried.
He did.
Yeah. I mean, he was asked to carry and did. And I think, like, even just small things like the balls to take Ignite on Ezreal, no, you got a Yumi behind you for the heal and the support. It's like, no, I am going to hard index into winning this 2v2. And, like, it's all well and good saying, like, oh, but, he's been set up to carry. It's like, yeah, but you still got to go and do it. And he did it with style, which really impressed me.
Yeah, did it with style, did it with grace. That Kong does not have a funny face, for he is the carry. And oh god, there's not much to say, because really, I would like to argue there wasn't really much of anybody else that really jumped out to me for this spot. Like, I don't think Yuhi, even though Burning Core went 2-0, not good enough to really contend. And Yutapong had a fine week, but nothing that was anywhere near to the level of what I thought Archer was doing.
Yeah, it was either Yutapong or Archer, and it wasn't really close between them.
Style. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And just more solid mechanics, and none of the teams that also went 1-on-1 really felt it. Yutori, as we've said, has had more of a quiet period of time, so that's why Archer cleans it up and definitely looking strong moving forward. Now, Initia1ise, would you like to give us your support of the week?
Certainly, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Went for Reinhardt.
Okay. Yeah. Nymaera, please.
In agreement once more with my brother, it is Reinhardt for me too.
I, to no one's surprise, probably put once as my support of the week.
What?
Wait, no, that's not meant to be once. God, I had a complete memory fart when I was doing this at 3 in the morning, wasn't I? God.
And my top laner of the week is Ace.
my top laner, jungler, mid laner.
Lexi, I thought you were doing that thing you did in spring week 1 again and put like Arya as your player mid laner of the week, but then like Syros as your player of the week overall.
Yeah,
like, is he doing something weird here? Like, is he trying to say this was the real support of his team? Like, maybe he's gonna put Yu-Gi-Oh for his double Lulu games. Did he forget where he was on the map?
All right, so let's put so I did mean a Burning Core member. I just had once in my head while I was doing it. I meant proud as my support of the week, as to no one's expectations. God, and that's not going to get cut out of the podcast. This is staying in.
No,
so.
no, that's a blooper now.
That is it. That is it. Proud was my support, and as it goes, minority must defend their point on the podcast. So all are
the Minority Report. We should call it. We should coin that. We should maybe copyright it.
I think that's a film. Maybe I'm not quite sure.
It is a film.
It's
Tom Cruise film.
Okay, I was making a joke about that. So why did I pick Proud as my support of the week? Well, one, his set game was just so good against Rascal Jester, found so many unique spots, was pulling ultimates that Ebby would blush at, of how solid they were. A real turnaround as well from his week 1 performance into week 2. His team just seemed to put a bit more trust, and the idea that Burning Core are playing around once with Proud, offering this kind of bruiser support kind of role, getting really into the nitty-gritty of things, trying to output damage, and arguably against the Jesters, if he wasn't on set or maybe a damaging support, I don't really know they could actually have won that game purely on the back of once. I think Proud really put a big showing there. His loss of this game was, granted, far more quiet, so I am willing to concede that, but they also had a better game just versus Access, in all fairness, so I think he's allowed to have a slightly quieter game there. And he did get 8 assists, didn't die, didn't take a kill. That's why I put Proud as my support of this week.
It was between Proud and Rhino for me too, in fairness.
Okay.
Proud's had a good first 4 games. I think that's fair to say. I think none of us are going to disagree with that. But Rhino, I mean, Sam mentioned it before. We first 5-6 minutes of the game, didn't see a single missed thresh hook on screen. The guy was absolutely monstrous mechanically, and that wasn't the end of it for him.
No.
The double flay to pull Yumi off, the hook,
that was huge.
The ignites, the plays under tower. Like, I know this guy has a good thresh, but just go watch those first 5 minutes, V3 Esports versus CGA, and just raise your eyebrows about how smart and how mechanically well the jungle and 2v2 of V3 play that game. I am in awe of Rhino this week, really am.
And that leaves us, gentlemen, with our overall player of the week, Nymaera. Would you do the honors, sir?
I actually had to edit this midway through because I disagree with I put it down. I'd initially put Ebby. I'm actually putting Boogie.
Okay, I can't. Yes, that's who I wanted to be my one. I picked Once as my overall player of the week. And Initia1ise?
Yeah, I went for Once as well.
Yeah, in fairness, we all went for the same role, and the people that, of course, we picked for that role, and we talked through these guys before.
Yeah, I mean, it's just doubling down, really, for me. Once, I just think, basically got Burning Core those game wins with Proud, basically giving him the support for it. There's nothing really more to say, and I totally can see why you put Boogie here, because I think him and Archer were just as critical.
I think it's also what weighed on me picking Boogie over Once and Rhino over Proud, is that, of course, it was the strength of schedule as well.
Yeah.
And I agree, Once and Proud, really important to their team's success. I'm just like, I can't see any other player but Boogie being able to pull off what he did in his shoes. And it was also against very strong schedule as well. Yep. I already talked about how he just masterfully manages the map and punishes people where they're not used to being punished. So for me, yeah, Boogie, very, very valuable this week.
I mean, what we're seeing here is a bit of a disagreement between strength of schedule versus
explosive outplay.
Almost like, well, not even explosive outplay, but like strength of the team you're on. Where, like, actually, and those are big conversations you need to have. It's like, actually, well, yeah, you were playing against easier teams. All that. Well, yeah, but your teammates really are just better, right? And that's an interesting conversation to have. And I think both have some serious weight. I think the reason I ended up indexing a little more into Once this week was because I actually think he's been playing really well for a couple of weeks. And this time it really showed off. The 9K fight on Kindred just blew my mind. I think how much he put Hoglet in the dirt by 100 CS.
Yep.
Oh my days, was just absurd.
In fact, 5 levels up.
That, like,
5 levels up.
Both games he did that. That's absurd.
No. Like, yeah, and I know obviously it's against weaker teams and we've been over that, but that is just ridiculous stuff. And I'll also say I think Boogie was aided by the fact that his team had a really solid plan for level 1, particularly against CGA. And yeah, Boogie played with that plan really well, but that's to me, that's sometimes a planning thing. Well, it's a planning thing, it's a draft thing. And that's less on purely.
But also vertical jungling versus an Olaf in that game as well. Normally Olaf just like leaves you in the dust in terms of farming. He was up in farm, forced like the one time Unica tries to fight him, he like gets the Ragnarok and just gets
Runs
out,
off.
and then just runs off, and it's like, oh, so now Olaf can't fight. No, it's very and of course once on the Kindred. Very important meta pick as well. It allows you to cancel so many of these different junglers, like the Trundle and whatever.
I mean,
it's important to see once picking that up, and you played it very, very well.
Yeah, I mean, this, as initially I said, this also just comes down to also personal preference on how we like to rate players. I have typically been the one out of the three of us who will not outright pick the, quote, best player, the one that has more impressed me more personally. And I think that is partly why we also all agreed with Ebby and Archer. I think that because we can just all outright go, well, there's no one in the top lane and there's no one really in the AD carry role who really just had performances like this. DFM went 1 and went 2-0. We didn't put a single other member of DFM here.
No.
That's just...
I think that's partly because they played against the 0-4 teams, partly, right?
Partly. But then we also, but then me and Initia1ise both put once who were also against 0-4 teams, and it just shows the kind of level of disparity and where we also rate certain players.
Also, I used pretty much the exact opposite logic as I did for like Boogie and Once for Ace and Ardia as well. That's the other thing, right? So I'm just then like, okay, but I think it's just me viewing who the actual beneficiaries of that style are. I'm like, oh, I think probably Ace probably benefit from Boogie more than Boogie benefit from Ace. That's how I've worked it in my head. Whereas like there are people like Once and Ardia and Ebby who just like, they just do it all themselves. They just like, that's it. Thanos snap, everyone's gone.
Well, it was why Arya... Oh, yeah. I mean, it was why Arya was our overall mid laner MVP, like, last split. Like, no real surprise there. The man was just...
Guy's a nutter. Guy's a nutter.
Absolutely mental, bruv. Now, that concludes our Players of the Week segment. Gentlemen, we have recapped our weekly roundup of all of the teams and how we think they're doing. We have now given our listeners our Players of the Week. And as... we are starting to run into the over the halfway point of our podcast. It's now time to bring back a segment we haven't done for a little bit. And gentlemen, we all know how this goes. It's Meta Talk. Meta Talk. So, as we love to round this section up, Nymaera, would you take the reins from me for this time being?
I didn't write down this first point, actually,
okay.
so I believe it's Sam that's been talking about this, so I'll throw it over to him after this, but effectively, across Global League of Legends, normally new champions tend to get some spotlight on them, and people start figuring out how to play with, play against, and how they fit into certain metas. Volibear is starting to show his head, particularly in the top lane and stuff like the LCS and the LEC. And we're not sure whether he'll make it over to the LJL, but if he does, it might be something to keep an eye on. So Sam, I think it might have been you that wrote this one down.
I did. Sure. So like again, anybody who's been following the LEC or the LCS has seen a bit of Volibear. Licorice kind of did some silly things on
Kumo?
it. Jenax got a quadro kill. Kumo got the 1v1 kill versus Licorice. And C9 are obviously a very hot team over in the LCS right now. And we're starting to see a little bit of the strength of Volibear, namely that he is a big bruiser who can build a bit of damage, turn off towers, and the moment he hits level 6, he has huge kill pressure. That kind of turnaround there is massive. In context with the LGL, he is a bruiser fighter top that a lot of our top laners really like to index into. This is an Ebby type champion. This is a Paz type champion. Appamen would play this, and I could definitely see this being picked out. When especially you've got things like carry junglers as well, who will want to find ways to get kills, being able to turn off towers as you dive them and feed your Nidalee or your Graves kills sounds pretty good to me. So I think we might see a bit of Volibear.
It's kind of like a new age set in some ways.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Set's not old.
That's what I was kind of thinking. And I mean, LS. I hate to bring him up so early on into Meta Talk, but he has played. I was watching / listening to the CLG podcast, and they mentioned that he's played something like 158 games since his rework in the top lane alone.
Oh, shit.
And maybe he might be more now. Apparently he's
mentally
fine.
Is he safe?
He's loving it, apparently. He's literally in love with the champion at the moment. Thinks he's really strong and powerful.
You can build Leandris on it.
Yeah, I'm not surprising he's happy with it. There's a bunch of different builds you can go on the champion. I've seen all kinds of wild builds, and it's nice to see a champion that doesn't have a direct correct, oh, you must always build Mask on him, or you must always build X, Y, and Z on him. He has a flexible build path. That's just partly due to the hive mind of League of Legends just not figuring that out. It will figure it out.
Yeah.
In context for Pro as well, like looking at stats and stuff, he doesn't really have a counter right now, particularly in top. Like you are safe to blind pick him.
Quinn.
Quinn's pretty bad against him, actually.
Oh, is
I'm going
it?
to throw
Really?
that there as the
Running people
resident. So the thing is, Volibear's Q has this really
so
bullcrap
fast.
mechanic on the Q, where so that's your run followed into a stun after you auto attack. If that is cancelled, it comes off cooldown. So if you vault and then I think you probably can get away with it if you have like tier 2 boots, phase rush, and W max. If you just vault him, get your mark, and then run the fuck the other way, you can probably get out of that. That's how you deal with Olaf. That's how you deal with Tryndamere and stuff. But Quinn into Volibear, I even think with that, if he opens up with the ult, he's still in a lot of trouble.
So Teemo?
That's the problem. There's no clear answer. It's like
Jace a little, but that
with Jace, but Jace can burst him out. Jace can burst him out. I don't think Renekton works. I think Renekton doesn't have enough damage. So I think Jace is the best answer.
Or you just put another brick wall against it and you just go, Maokai, don't die, and you just shrug your shoulders and go.
Volibear's good against tanks though. You can stand at turret. I think you play something. I think what you do, you end up playing Ornn or Maokai and just stand at turret.
Okay, yeah.
But then he
And
just
even
dives you with a jungler
turret
eventually.
at level 6. He turns off the turret as well.
You know, basically, I think I think the one champion that does do okay in team is Aurelia. Aurelia, you go blade first. Aurelia, you have enough CC to kind of like start playing around with that. I think if you get ahead in that matchup, Aurelia can deal with him. Don't quiz me on that. I've played that matchup a couple of times myself in solo queue, and admittedly that's only like diamond stuff, but it's not the worst thing ever because you do have a lot of anti-tank mechanics. But even then, Volibear has probably, well, he's safer in team fights because he doesn't get burst out so much. But yeah, Volibear could make it to the LJL. I can definitely see players that'll pick him up.
Okay. Well, that raises some interesting places for us. Apparently, a really bad matchup, according to Korean Challenger, is Shen.
Oh, you've got the dodge field. That makes sense.
Apparently, he's only got a 20% win rate, but granted, that's only in
games?
only 30 matches in Challenger.
No, I don't mind that because so the theory craft of that is your taunt is not actually canceling your Q because you're still auto attacking. So if you have your taunt into your W and stuff, you can bait out his Q, and you don't max that anyway. So it's the stun and other stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
But like all of Volibear is, I mean, he's got like his Sky Splitter, the lightning bolt thing, which is pretty nasty and all that stuff. But Shen has either of his two first items are wave clear, either Sunfire Cape or Titanic Hydra. So you're going to have wave control either way. You're just going to make sure that lane is never like interactive. Like you make sure like you're just clearing waves. You don't want to fight him. If you do, your shield comes up, you play around that, and then you just affect the map somewhere else. So I can see Shen being okay. You know who was a Shen player in the LJL? That was Nap. So Nap might end up pulling that out.
Weak style player.
He played that in, he won one game versus V3 in semifinals actually of that.
Wasn't he played into?
No, that was into Oh, it might have been into Camille, yeah. No, I think it was Aatrox or something. But yeah, no, he played it.
Galavaganda.
But Volibear is causing some disruptions over in the NA and EU professional play, meaning that potentially bleed through might happen. It will depend on if it's picked up heavily over in Korea and the LPL as well, as I don't believe those regions have actually shown a game from that champion yet. There might be one or two games actually in the LPL, I'm thinking now.
I haven't watched any that have.
I mean, I try and track stats as on top of vaguely watching games, so it's hard to keep super on top of everything. But that is our first point. Volibear potentially coming over to the LJL. One game near you soon. Who knows? Now, we'll go on and show us if you got the stats.
It was into the Aatrox, by the way, Al. You were correct. It was Shen into Aatrox. Right. He won the first game against it. I believe he lost the second. He picked it twice.
Okay. Nymaera, would you put us on to our next point? So, yes.
Okay. The next thing is effectively one kind of conflated point between a lot of things regarding Ezreal, effectively.
Okay.
There are two things, particularly in regards to LJL. We're kind of bringing it more local again. Ezreal into Aphelios is kind of a well-trodden matchup now, and I wanted to explore what we thought of that matchup from our experience of it, because I think that probably Aphelios is beating out Ezreal now, especially in the LJL. In fact, I do have the stats for that. As far as I'm aware, they both have 10 picks and 4 bans. Okay. As far as I'm aware, 10 picks, 5 bans, I believe it is. So 10 games played.
Yep.
They've been traded most of the time as a handshake. Most of the time they're against each other.
Yep.
Aphelios, I believe, has a 70% win rate, so he's 7-3. Whereas Ezreal has a 40% win rate. You look at these two champions and like, okay, so most of the time they're against each other, and the Aphelios is definitely winning out. However, we've had a lot of pro opinions saying, actually, you look at Scrim, so T1 Teddy, he's one of the best AD carries in the world, if not the best AD carry in the world, says, Ezreal outranges Aphelios. He should really be winning these kind of games, and Scrims, it definitely shows up that way. What do we make of how these games are evolving with these two champions involved?
Sometimes I think there is a distinct difference between Scrim meta and stage meta, and it's sometimes about aggression. And Ezreals that play defensive are so different to Ezreals that play aggressively. The best Ezreals in the world that we can think of: Deft, Prey, Teddy. These guys who have like obliterated people. It's about being able to play Ezreal aggressively. If Aphelios gets to be free and you're not abusing that range advantage, then that's a problem, because Aphelios team fights so damn well versus tanks and the like, and he can just shred people off clutch plays in a way that Ezreal needs to be kind of being hyper aggressive in some ways to get that off, to get the real advantage in a laning phase. That's less common on stage. People play safer on stage. It's a known phenomenon.
Sengoku versus V3. Look at that lane.
So I pulled up the same stats that probably you both might be looking at the moment of looking at specifically Ezreal first, as he is in the worst part of the win percentage. One of our AD carries, Initia1ise, has 2 wins on the champion. One of those is against DFM playing that farming Senna lane, so that was against a Maokai. And then the other one is against Sivir. So they've played 6 games out of the 10 there, and 1, 2, 3, 4... basically has about that 40% win rate, maybe slightly lower on the Ezreal Aphelios matchup. I think if you are maybe the best player, like the better AD carry, and with the better support, I do think Ezreal should win the lane. But the problem is, I think that disparity is not anywhere near as common as it should be in the LJL. I think there are wider margins between AD carries as well as supports, and I think that's playing a part.
Yeah. It's very important you bring up the whole thing about supports there, because one of the wider points about this is, this is all things about Ezreal. This isn't just about Ezreal versus Aphelios. If Ezreal is first picked, what do you do to counter that? Because you know the Yumi's going to come in at some point. We saw one of these games, which I was really in love with. CGA saw the Ezreal first picked by the Hawks, I believe it was.
Yep.
It was the Hawks, yeah. And they immediately locked in Ashe. Ashe is not the S tier AD carry, and they locked in Ashe, and I believe they didn't even log in the Yumi with it, right? So the Yumi was open, but then Hawks see the Ashe and like, oh crap. If you lock in Ezreal Yumi now, if Ezreal ever gets hit by the arrow and doesn't have cleanse, of course you can force that out with the various other things. That's it, 2 kills, just straight there. No counterplay. You do not pass go. You do not collect $200. In fact, they do. They collect 400 gold from the 2 of you or whatever it is.
Basically,
like it's just a freebie. I loved what they tried to do with this. Do I think it would work into every comp? No. The kicker was then they had to lock in something to protect the Ezreal. They didn't lock in something like a Braum. They locked in a Tahm Kench, which meant that CGA locked in a Bard alongside the Ashe. It's a pressure lane because you got better wave control, you have better poke, and also if the Bard roams, you cannot punish the Ashe because you got a bloody Tahm Kench who does very little in lane besides just protecting your AD carry. So CGA absolutely crushed that in their version of like the Ezreal counter. I don't know whether it would work in another LGL matchup, but this was really interesting to see myself.
Also, just like bluntly, that poor Tahm Kench was against 2 champions that have range on him and also have slows. Like he moves forward to Tongue Lash and takes like an auto attack from Bard is slowed, takes a volley from Ashe is slowed. She throws Ranger's focus, and if he's ever beyond halfway in the lane, he sort of slowly runs away as his health bar disappears. He's got no options.
There were just so many problems, partly with that draft, partly with I mean the Hawks didn't draft that brilliantly. But then also,
I do like what CGA did though.
But CGA just kind of put them in the dirt. In all fairness to them, like that Ashe pick was super cool, and potentially if Ezreal's going to be exploited in that sense by an Ashe pick, because if Ashe Yumi becomes super meta, if something like Ashe is just able to look at it and go, Ashe, I have another support like Bard who can also lock you both at the same time.
Yeah.
There's
great right now.
huge problems. Thresh is also good in that spot as well because of his hook is also able to grab both of them, and the flay as well. There's
Oh, this is the thing though, right?
Yeah.
This is the thing though, because like I juxtapose this because the game we saw just before that one was V3 Sengoku, where it was a first pick Ezreal from V3. Sengoku replied basically in the first 3 picks with I think they locked in Aphelios Zoe. I think they locked in that round, but they went in for the Aphelios Thresh. They chose not to pick up the Yuumi. I'm wondering if you have to pick away the Yuumi. Yuumi Aphelios is not an awful lane either. You can also pick someone like MF Yuumi, but particularly coming back to this whole like the Ezreal Aphelios thing, this is a game where we saw this matchup go the way of the Ezreal on the V3, and of course that's a team thing. You can say maybe V3 because they're the stronger team, more likely to win anyway, or at least in the way they're playing right now. Maybe that tilts our view of that matchup because we saw it 2 games in a row effectively with like this kind of the way you counter the first pick Ezreal or something. Because in fact later on through the day we did eventually see people. In fact, if you look at DFM, so Rascal Jester DFM, then Burning Core Rascal Jester, Aphelios was first picked in both those games instead of the Ezreal and stuff like that. We're seeing less Ezreal bans. It is more like a handshake. I think particularly if you're a team like Burning Core, you have to first pick the Aphelios, but does that apply to all the teams? Is Ezreal the straight first pick? There are a lot of things about Ezreal in the meta right now.
Like I called it earlier, right? That if you want to pick the Ezreal into the Aphelios, you're like Aphelios will probably have wave control over the Ezreal. I'd kind of gander probably. But like the Ezreal can win the trades, and I think you've got to play it aggressively. And you saw Archer went with the ignite, went for that early, so like 2v2, which they kind of
the heal was on the Yuumi,
yeah, and that was just big. That actually, if you are going to pick that Ezreal and play against the Aphelios, you just need to be a little bit more bloodthirsty, and probably like you might need to bring your jungler and stuff around to be able to do that, so you're not going to counter gank as a result of it. But I appreciate the way V3 did play the Ezreal to win that matchup. And I do think about it. It's just sometimes like, you just got to go a bit balls to the wall sometimes.
I mean, it brings the question that I brought up early, week or... Actually, no, in our off-season, because Olaf jungle was such a big thing and carry junglers were reigning supreme with Olaf specifically. Olaf Yuumi was a huge important factor in a lot of games in the LJL. Just ban Yuumi! And then suddenly half of the problem is just solved. Ezreal doesn't become anywhere near as strong. He has to play with worse supports, which don't support him in a lot of senses. His late game has a ceiling now. It doesn't get to go even further through that glass ceiling and really become ultra mega carry. If you ban the Yuumi, Ezreal gets worse, and also a bunch of other comps become far more viable, and Kalista also starts to become far better in a lot more spots as well.
I think my problem is in zero lanes, no one really matches up to Ezreal for a support for Yuumi. There are some other lanes like MF Yuumi's alright, it's still good, but Ezreal Yuumi is really the S tier, and then like your other TVTs can go a bit awry. And if you're on red side, there are so many things you want to ban. Because you need to ban Varus. Varus cannot be let through. Varus counters Ezreal. Varus counters pretty much everything. Even though we saw Art play it and lose later in the day, I think that's more of a Justice as a team problem. That's the one Varus game we've actually seen. And then Kalista slowly coming back as well in the LJL. It's obviously very much rampant across the world. Yes. There are some lanes which can very much deal with Yuumi and Ezreal in terms of the Varus and the Kalista. You have to ban them, which means like it's almost the lesser of the two evils, letting the Ezreal through, and then you're saying, look. I don't agree with giving Ezreal Yuumi. I don't think you can give that amount of agency. People are also banning the Graves because Graves is a very good first pick too.
Good.
But like there are so many things I'm just sat there. I'm like, it's the ideal world to not give Ezreal Yuumi, but how much are you avoiding by doing that? Because you have to ban something else.
And that is going to be a relative team-by-team basis thing of what they're more comfortable playing against, where they want to go with things, and honestly, how the meta will evolve over the next few patches, and how the game will evolve and play from there. But Ezreal, high priority in the LJL, definitely a safe bet to say. And really interesting points, actually, about Ezreal maybe just should be beating Aphelios, but now not beating Aphelios because of how drafts and things have been going.
It's like Mages in bot lane versus Aphelios, right? I mean, I've talked about, I love Syndra into Aphelios. Syndra is kind of viewed as like the Aphelios counter in some ways. Aphelios has really low base magic resist, the lowest one in the game. And like, so technically, if you can poke out the Aphelios and have some magic damage threat, this guy really suffers. No team has managed to pull that off, at least coming out of the laning phase. You can kind of, or even in the laning phase, we've not really seen anyone like punish the Aphelios. Is Aphelios looking stronger because people just aren't putting the cosh on him, just making him suffer?
Yeah.
We know that Initia1ise plays Syndra bot. I'm pretty sure Gango can play it too. Oh no, actually no, Gango looked really bad at the one time he played Talia.
Initia1ise's the one guy in bot, and he looks alright on it. Like he's the one guy.
Bless
no,
Initia1ise.
Maybe it's
he makes everything
maybe
work.
It's the teams. Yeah. maybe it's the teams not knowing how to punish it. Maybe that's the other thing.
Maybe that's the thing. Initia1ise, do you have any other closing thoughts on that, or would you?
I think it's sometimes Aphelios at the minute is reaching team fights with 2 items uncontested. At which point, Aphelios is where he wants to be. Congratulations! Like, if you... this is just like, he's got Hurricane, he's got Infedge, he's ready to fight. If you want to play against Aphelios, you can dive him. He's very immobile. He's got low base metrics. There are ways to fight him. I just don't think people are indexing hard enough into fighting him on stage. We know scrims are different. People play more aggressively on scrims, limit testing, what have you. I need to see a little bit more kill pressure a la V3.
Oh, V3 have won both sides. V3 have won both sides this week, so...
That's the big thing for me. That's the big thing for me.
Yeah.
So I think...
That's why he won player of the week for us.
If you want to play against Aphelios, you gotta punish him. Or play against it, rather.
Yes.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah, you have to play against it. You have to look good. And that will end our little section on Meta Talk.
Meta Talk.
I'm not going to keep going until you do it, Sam.
Meta Talk.
Thank you.
I blanked on that. I was thinking about the questions. I was like, oh, what are they waiting for? Oh.
Yeah, I was literally looking at the screen going, go on, Sam, do it. Do it. Do it.
What you doing here?
I'm sorry.
As we do sometimes get graced with our lovely community and listeners out there, do send us questions to answer on the podcast. We do ask over on our Discord, but if you want to ask us questions either through Twitter or what have you, feel free to always ping them over to us. We do also ask in our Discord a day or two before we go live with our podcast, or not live, but until we record our podcast. There we go, I got there in the end. First question comes to us from Ishiki. Love you, sir. He asks us, Syros looked rough against Rascal Jesters. What if he would retire? Which Japanese mid would we most likely be the successor for Syros? And then he does want to correct himself. He did forget about the game against Axis. So, but specifically, he did look a bit rough against Rascal Jester. I think that is very fair, and we did hammer on that a little bit. Yes. So
the theoretical is Syros retires, let's say at the end of the split. I want to add a very important caveat in here. Some of the Korean players in Japan are getting old enough to the point where they start having residency. It's 3 out of the last 5 years they had to have played in here, as far as I'm aware. Steel is one of those players. Steel would be a resident and therefore open up an import slot for DFM. Does that change your opinion? For me, yes, it does.
I see who you're going towards, and it might be the one reason that particular player stays in the LJL rather than heading to the LCK. I get it. I mean, let me add a
We're talking about Ace here, right? And just succeeding Syros, right, as a Japanese player, of course.
So let me add a caveat here as well. That, like, I will say I think it's quite unlikely in some ways, at least that Syros ever completely leaves, because this is him and Initia1ise are quite literally the second most tenured players in the world on a team, apart from Faker. Faker is the only person to have stayed with the team
that
for
is
longer
insane kind of stat to have it for a team.
He is called Emperor in Japanese. His aim is to be the Japanese Faker. This is the guy who has been around, who is the face of the LJL, the face of DFM alongside Initia1ise. So, like, that kind of loyalty, and within Japan, and brand loyalty and company loyalty is a big thing there. There isn't all that much room. If you wanted a Japanese player to step in, the answer last year was Ramune. We saw a little bit of him. I'm not sure who else really is out there. Maybe Ramune, maybe Gadiaru.
Ace.
I think if you are seeing...
Ace. He plays utility mid.
He does.
I do think...
Okay, go on.
I think that Ace would be a straight downgrade for him. I kind of said that Ace was, like... don't get me wrong, Syros had like a really bad game this week, but even at his worst, I think that he's more likely to outperform Ace than the other round. I mean, look at the finals. No, semi-finals, right? See DFM versus V3. We saw, like, Yeah, like Ace really didn't deal well with.
And how much of that is
Zeros.
Boogie also assisting and the rest of the team and Archer
Yeah,
really picking up since
yeah.
summer started? Yeah, agreed.
There's some of that. There is some of that, and also, but like then you can say the same thing for DFM, right?
Yeah.
Say like, oh, you know, how much is their team? But like V3's other members, we're really high on them. We really like them. It's just Ace, who I mean, we're gonna have to use this in like our post-split stuff when we talk about V3 and our predictions stuff like that. It's like, we had that question of why do you think V3 is not going to get above third? And I said, Boogie's great, Archer's good, Paz is limited, and Ace is a liability. And don't get me wrong, I think that Ace has very much shown me up right now, but I do think that Seros, he's not in a position where like he's threatened for his position right now, not from a Japanese mid.
But there is that caveat though, that if maybe they can pick up Arya and he's considered available for the spot, like Ebby, Steel, Arya as a top side of the map sounds pretty damn good to me, guys.
Oh no, potentially Gadiadu could replace him actually.
Yeah,
I think Gadiadu is pretty good.
Gadiadu is good. As could Ramone, maybe, like if Seros decides to step down. But we saw them try that and they didn't stick with it.
They didn't stick with that. And I think that does raise the question that there is external talent that could definitely come in to that mid lane. I mean, what if Pyrion was able to come over? I don't think it would ever happen, but Pyrion could be an option for DFM. And I think...
Yeah, that would be quite interesting.
I don't see Syros retiring anytime soon, in
No,
fairness. While I have huge caveat problems for him, specifically, which I'm very vocal about, I think his champion pool is hindering a huge amount of DFM's drafting ability. And I think if they were able to solve that problem, I think they would genuinely be a world-class team that could go to Worlds and get to groups and do really well, relatively speaking. I do think they are individually that talented as well as that. It's just he doesn't want to do that, and unorthodox. And Joshi was saying this on Twitter, that potentially his champion pool is forcing awkward drafts, and maybe that might be a problem moving forward.
Well, this is something which in playoffs I really liked about Syros. He was getting better at that. He was, picking stuff like Azir, which he hadn't done for a while. He still had his supportive picks, and he came out with a whole slew of different stuff, and it was working for them. I just don't understand why he's kind of reverted again back in regular split.
Yeah.
So that could be just a coaching thing, is what they think is working. But like, I will potentially disagree with Lexi, but only on a semantic point.
Of course.
So in that, I'm not sure it's necessarily his champion pool that's limiting, in like actually, because he's got enough champions. I think it's more a style. It's his play style issue.
Yeah,
it's a stylistic issue. Like his pool's actually pretty big. He plays quite a lot of champions, quite a high standard. It's what style those champions are. It's Eimerdingers, it's Azirs, it's Ziggs, it's Karmas, all that kind of thing. Syndra's possibly an exception in it. He plays a great Syndra, don't get me wrong, but we don't see Lucians and LeBlancs and Zoes out of him at the minute.
Yeah, and I think that might be partly a meta thing, maybe partly something else. I'm not sure.
Like, maybe they don't play around it that well. Maybe they don't want to play around it that well. But as far as we can see.
Yeah, and potentially moving forward, we will be able to see something out of Syros. And who knows, maybe this is just them trying to see if they can fix these problems with his current champion pool. Experimenting. This is the time to do experimental stuff. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's what we're seeing over in the LEC with G2 at the moment. So, I mean, this is the
they've got different issues.
But I also think this is the time to do experimenting, because I think DFM are pretty confident that they'll make a deep run in playoffs. So, time to experiment now, try things out, see how the team work on it, and then if it doesn't work, we already know it did work.
He plays so much Ziggs anyway. It's like, for me, that's not an experiment, and to be honest, like his fundamentals look very lacking in that game in particular. I get that it's online right now, and that might be a different atmosphere, but they look fine during playoffs and into the last couple of weeks.
They won it.
Stuff. Like,
they won it.
They did. Yes, they did. And a lot of that was off. I mean, Seros playing really well for me. He genuinely did play very well.
Sure.
So, I mean, do I think he should retire? No. Do I have questions of him? Yeah, I guess I have questions about most players in the league. Every one of them, to be honest. Even Ardia, I'm like, would he fit into DFM's atmosphere? He doesn't play supportive picks. That means that potentially their philosophy would have to change. Could they make it work? Of course they could. They got a lot of talent, but he's not the kind of guy that will play like set mid if they needed to, or Karma or Heimerdinger. Like that's the kind of thing where I'm like, maybe some like Gadiadu.
He did play an Ornn mid though.
Did he?
Arya played Ornn mid.
He got solo killed by an Ornn mid.
No, Arya played Ornn mid.
I can't remember him doing that.
Didn't he?
Jeez.
Or did he? Oh no, he got solo killed by an Ornn mid.
By Ninja on Ornn mid. Yeah. That was the thing. Like,
I just thought he was the guy getting the kill, because I'm so used to Arya getting all the kills.
LeBlanc as well. I think it's LeBlanc.
Apologies, I assumed it was just Arya winning lane because that's what he normally does. So
so potentially it might not fit the atmosphere just because not fit the philosophy because he plays a different brand of champion, but he's really good at what he does. So I mean, I'd still go with him.
Good question, though. Thank you, Ishiki, for that question.
No,
good question.
Got some meat on the bones there.
Got us thinking a little bit about it, and maybe this will be something to think about for other mid laners moving forward, as well as just the LJL. And also, there might be that slight exodus in the reverse exodus happening for Korean players, as when the LCK becomes fully franchised in 2021. It'll be interesting to see who sticks around, who stays here, salaries, and everything else. Consensus. Happens, who is a fan of DFM on our Discord, asked us and posed us the question, do we think the LJL's overall level has increased or decreased from spring to summer?
Top of the table, increased. Bottom of the table, decreased.
I totally agree with that sense. I think part of the problem we're seeing in that bottom part and why it has decreased so much is, well, part of it is just due to substitutes. Axis and Rascal Jester both having to force themselves to play some substitutes are genuinely hurting the team, and it's painfully obvious to see these teams just aren't playing to the same level they were playing in spring, and that is unfortunate. The Hawks, frankly, don't really seem to have changed much, really, from their spring to summer. Even with the changes, they don't seem to have really fixed what's wrong with them and why they're not getting the wins when they should, and only seem to be really able to pick up the 1 or 2 wins in the early part of it. If they promptly go 0-10, I don't think I'll be surprised. Sadly, but I...
No.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like, I think the fact that our top 4 teams look very competitive.
Yeah, agreed.
Great news.
Totally.
And, like, to kind of answer your question, or answer Happen's question in a way that is a little, perhaps a little bit of a cop-out. I think it has increased competitively in the ways that matter. If the middle of the table had got more competitive, that's all well and good, but it's not going to matter at the top end of the table. The fact that the top end of the table is now more competitive, I think, is more important than overall.
Yeah.
Have we got some issues particularly with visas for Rascal Jesters and Hand Axes and the Hawks still looking a bit meh? Yes, we do. Maybe that recovers if visa issues get solved within the next week or 2. It can be a bit of a long-winded process, and that could be really difficult for the squads. That is a problem for the league on the whole. But the top's at the top of the table looking super competitive. So, yes, I think, but with caveat.
Okay, so like if I'm going through individual teams, because we only got 2 weeks to go off of,
Yep.
the big changes Rascal Jester, they were like a 4th, 5th place team. Now they are like solidly right at the bottom.
And with a half-decent draft, we used to be like, they could genuinely outdraft any of the teams. Like, they were our smart team, weren't they?
Yeah.
They're like the mad scientists. That's the kind of the catchphrase I guess we used for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, which is why I would have loved to see them versus Axes in round 1. That would have been really cool. The drafts they would have come out there would have been very unique. Losing them as kind of like this mid to upper table team really sucks. However, I think that Sengoku have come in really hot into this split. Compared to like early split Sengoku, this is absolutely worlds apart. And V3, of course, we talked about them being on the up and up too. There is an argument to say that DFM have come in worse than finals. I think that's fair to say. That they don't look as together, particularly in that, in their Sengoku loss, they looked all over the place, and we need to see more from them. If this is just experimentation and they're looking to, find the lay of the ground and the lay of the land rather, and try and make a later run for like those top upper buy spots and stuff for playoffs, I could see where they're coming from that. But even then, like I think the upper part of the table between like CGA looking pretty on it, V3 looking very good, Sengoku looking more solid, and DFM still looking good. That's a strong 4-pack that we can use to kind of like compete against each other and push yourself further.
I'd be okay with that. Even go to Worlds, I think. If they got to the finals and won using their strength as is, I'd be happy to see them go.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And I think Burning Core are kind of trying to fill that spot that Rascal Jesters kind of are sadly leaving for us. They need to keep having good performances, and that we will have to wait and see for how Burning Core keep going. But if they've kind of figured out a way to do this, and Yu-Gi-Oh playing that mid lane, currently fine, totally fine. I'm more than happy with how he's playing it. maybe there's a chance that they can fill that. The problem is they don't quite have that individual skill that we were really pleased with the Rascal Jesters, because they had that, especially in their mid.
Art and Ninja.
Yeah.
Art and Ninja. Yeah.
So such a void has been left there, which the team really seemed to kind of rally behind each other, and and you could tell that they really just were like, okay, we're all going in as a 5. Sometimes it would just go horribly for them, but at least they did it, and it gave us some beautiful team fights to watch.
Yeah. Flash virus initiations by yourself, Ninja. Okay, man.
God. Oh.
Never.
That was versus Burning Core, actually.
It was.
Missed.
Yeah, and then pay the price. But the ultimate price was always paid, and it was beautiful to watch because they'd all go in, and it was lovely to watch. A small thing I also want to bring up for our previous question from Ishiki is DFM don't have any substitute mid laners. They have 2 substitute tops, a substitute jungle and substitute bot lane. They don't have a substitute mid or support, which is an interesting thing to think, which is just something I was hovering over their current lineup, and I'm like, that's interesting, but I don't think that's a huge thing. And yeah, I would agree. I think it has overall increased, but some of the teams we have sadly kind of lost some of their power, which hurts it a little bit. But
yeah, obviously Axes aren't looking strong, and they looked pretty good at the end of the split.
They did.
You know, they were taking wins off of some pretty big names. Then the question is like the overall level. I do think it's gone up as a league. I think,
but not as much as you would want, really.
Not as much as I would have liked, mainly because the bottom of the tail is kind of dragging down a bit, and that kind of makes it hard to benchmark some teams. But I like the innovation that's coming out. The teams which are doing well, and if they're doing that decisively, I'm very impressed by that. Just need to see what the step forward from this is. And the big thing for me is, like, if I compare this to this point in spring, definitely much better. Absolutely. It's just like if I'm comparing this to like finals and end of split, I'm like, okay, all right, where's this going with this? So if things go up on the upswing and we can improve from here, good hopes. But still questions to be asked.
Still questions to be asked indeed, and we'll only get those answers with more games being played. So obviously, as I say always, remember, join us, follow us on our social medias. We will be live casting the last 5 games of week 3 of the LJL split. Week 3, God, my brain's all a bit all over the place today, I can tell. And we will be covering Axis facing off against Sengoku Gaming, Rascal Jester facing off against Axis, Crest Gaming Act facing off against Rascal Jester, and probably our game of the week, unless DFM V3 take it, will be Sengoku Gaming facing off against Crest Gaming Act. A lovely high game to end us off for our cast, and then we will be there on the Monday to bring the following 4 games of the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks facing off against Burning Core, V3 Esports facing off against the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, and then we'll have Destination Focus Me facing off against V3 Gaming, and to end us out on Monday, it will be Burning Core facing off against Data Nation Focus Me. Gentlemen, any closing thoughts for this podcast?
I think we covered all of the teams pretty well, actually. I hope this gives a bit more of a coherent view of what we think of the LJL right now. Going into the next couple of weeks, of course, you know, we've posited a lot of different questions. Come back, see our future podcast episodes, and see if they've been answered.
I will draw our viewers or listeners' eyes to the 2 games that Lexi called out there. DFM versus V3 is going to be huge. Is V3 the guys at the top? Can they beat DFM? That's the next big hurdle in their way. Sengoku Gaming versus CGA. It's another big top of the table clash. Those are games to keep an eye on, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
They will indeed. But with that all said, gentlemen and our listeners, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all very, very soon.